From the Mapleview Animal Hospital studios, this is the WHTC Morning News with Gary Stevens and Peg McNichol on 99.7, 1450 WHTC and WHTC.com.
And we welcome you back to the WHTC Morning News for this Tuesday, June the 9th, Tuesday mornings. With this time, we normally have the opportunity to talk a little bit about what's going on in Washington and share some views with the longtime congressman from St. Joseph who represents Allegan County in the halls of Congress. He is Fred Upton on the other side of our Zoom connection this morning. Fred, good morning. I wish you and your family well on this
thanks very much. Thanks very much. Good to be with you always.
It is very pleasant, and unfortunately, we do have some unpleasant things we need to discuss about, and we'll start right off the bat. Last week, Democratic Congresswoman Karen Bass, leader of the Congressional Black Caucus, joined you and other members of the Problem Solvers Caucus to discuss ideas for ending racial injustice and police brutality. Obviously, a timely situation, and the Problem Solvers, as you've mentioned before, not afraid to tackle the tough subjects, and this one is as tough as any that you have faced as a member of the caucus.
Well, it really is. I mean, we know that this unrest is justified. I joined a peaceful protest in Benton Harbor last week. I've reached out to many community leaders throughout our district to get their input. We can't stay still. We know that. And yesterday, the Congressional Black Caucus and the Democratic leadership released a draft proposal, 180 some pages long. I haven't had a chance to thumb through it yet. It's my understanding that they're going to have a hearing tomorrow. I've seen some national publications talking about some bipartisanship that needs to happen. And frankly, that's one of the reasons why the Bipartisan Problem Solvers Caucus met on the Zoom call with Karen Bass, the head of the Black Caucus, as you indicated, for a good hour last week, as we talked about a number of ideas that I think where we can come together, not only as two parties, but as a country, to move us forward, work with our law enforcement folks, establish a national registry so that when we do find those bad apples, they're not able to go from one jurisdiction to another and hide that past. So I think there's a number of things that we can do. We'll see how this process plays out. Sounds like it's gonna move pretty quick. I looked at the press conference that was on C-SPAN yesterday, and it seems as though we may have this bill on the House floor literally in about 2 weeks.
That would be a very quick amount of time, possibly moving through the House, but unfortunately, or whatever, the Senate and the president might have to, swallow a little bit to be able to go with some of the reforms, but in an election year might have to be the case in this situation.
Well, you know what? We know that we have divided government, and the only way you're going to get something done is if you work together. This is an issue that most of us are very concerned about. I think there are a good number of steps that we can take. I saw a report last night on, I want to say Political or The Hill, one of the Washington political magazines. Mitt Romney wants to be a broker to work with Republicans and Democrats. It's my understanding that the top Republican on the Judiciary Committee wants to work on a Republican proposal. So I know there are areas where we can come together on. And frankly, I was heartened when I saw that Joe Biden said last night, apparently, that there's not going to be an effort to defund the police. Look, we know that we need good law enforcement folks. We know that we have to pay them a salary where they can raise their family and be able to recruit good officers that are there. Defunding the police is not the answer that we need to look at this point in time. That's for sure. And I now that both Biden and Pelosi have spoken against that, it's not in the proposal that was offered last night. I think that's a sign of good faith.
We're talking with Congressman Fred Upton, and let's go from the police brutality aspect to the racial injustice. And some might say the George Floyd incident really opened up more of the case of racial justice and dealing with racial injustice than anything else besides the police brutality aspect of the situation. There are those who are critical, or shall we say, who say that those of us who are Caucasian cannot understand the Black situation because of white privilege. How do you characterize white privilege, and what's your understanding of that term?
Well, just a couple things. As I reached out to community leaders throughout our district over the last 8 or 10 days, the message back to me has been this. It is so important that white folks, white leaders also speak out in chorus with the Black community leaders that we see across the nation. If we're going to make a change, and we need to do that, we have to be united in speaking against those injustices. We know I know that from talking and having hearing many experiences from those of color with difficulties that they've had on discrimination, whether it be colleagues, whether it be colleagues' kids, whether it be leaders, it doesn't matter. There is an issue here that has not been addressed in the way that we as Christians, as Americans, understand what the Constitution is when it says justice for all. We need to have the same standard, and we need to make sure that there is not discrimination based on gender, on race, etc. And this is the time that it needs to be addressed and fixed. And that's where we as Americans, regardless of color, but as Republicans and Democrats and independents, we need to come together and listen and move the ball forward down the field. That's what we need to do at this point.
We're talking with Congressman Fred Upton, and I do want to bring up one more point before our conversation ends. You, along with the House Majority Whip Jim Clyburn of South Carolina, have introduced a bill to increase access to rural broadband. And some say that this is really a bill that could also help address some of the injustice issues, because many in the rural community don't have it. Many in the urban community don't have it as well. Sometimes it's financial, but in the case of the rural broadband, it's more of a case of they're just not out there right now. You go to the UP and broadband is, shall we say, a little sparse.
Well, you're exactly right. And really the most vulnerable are the ones most impacted by this. But, as I sit down, and I heard Mary Whiteford on your show, on your new show a little bit, this has been a big issue for her too. We know that particularly in our rural counties, and even in our urban counties, there are a good number of spots in Berrien County that don't have internet either. We have whole counties that don't have that access. And as we look to where we're headed in the future, particularly after COVID, what we're going to be doing with businesses, what we're going to be doing with telehealth, what we're going to be doing with e-commerce and e-education. As we look at what the schools are going to have to do this fall, it's going to be different. And our families are going to need that broadband access. So what this bipartisan bill does, Jim Clyburn, the Democratic whip, myself, we are the Republican and Democrat leads on this. And we're going to do all that we can to really fund a program from the FCC. This is not going to take an appropriation from the Appropriations Committee. This is something that's going to be done by an auction. Literally, where for Michigan, we'll be able to bring back more than $100 million each year for the next 10 years to make sure that our communities are wired for broadband access. And we're going to work to get it done, perhaps with a vote as early as before the end of the month, perhaps.
And being the historian that I kind of think of myself as, because I was a history minor at the University of Detroit, I equate maybe this issue to, say, you take a look back at electricity, wiring communities for electricity, or telephones, or even plumbing. This has become a basic issue. Well,
to borrow a phrase here, fix the damn roads. I'm tired of hearing the internet's coming that last mile. We've heard that for the last 10 years, and it hasn't happened. This bill is going to get that fixed.
He is Congressman Fred Upton, who joins us Tuesday mornings here on WHTC to talk about some of the issues of the day. As always, Fred, we appreciate you joining us in the Zoom connection. It has been something that during this pandemic, it has been a blessing, I should say, to be able to chat with you face to face, even though it is on a virtual basis, but to hear your nice, clear tones. And if all goes well, let's do this again next Tuesday morning.
I hope so, and you're going to be able to tell when I obey the governor's order when the barber shops open up again.
I think we're both in the same boat. If you can look at my hair, yes, I think we do need to see the friendly barber with that distinctive pull. Fred, have a good week.
Photo op, right?
You got it. Thank you very much. That is Fred Upton on 99.7 and 1450 WHTC.